right, any other questions? Can we move then to Policy Advisory Council, which I don't think
There's not much. You know what? We gave you a first read on a policy related to classes. I think that policy needs to kind of sit on hold a little bit right now. I'd ask that you read it, but I think what we should probably do is, once we start getting into the details of staffing and credits, especially after March, if we start looking at graduation requirements or credit caps for future years, I think we have to look at that policy, because if we eventually put a cap on how many credits a kid's going to earn or what types of classes they can take at RB, we're going to have to open our policy so that if they are willing to pay money and go to an online course or go to Triton at night to take an additional course, that we would recognize a dual credit situation or a virtual class for credit. So I think before we try to make a decision on something, before we know where we're going, let's keep that on our radar. Let's look and see how staffing goes. The reason I'm kind of giving you still some open-ended scenarios, I know you guys don't necessarily like that, but I'm trying to lay it out here for you that based on registration numbers coming up, we might realize that a majority of the kids, more than what already now are doing 7, want 7 again next year. So then that's going to force us to say either class sizes need to be this, or we're going to have to put a cap somewhere, either on incoming freshmen or a number of electives. So we have to just kind of hold off on that. And before we do get into this 6:310, I think we should wait to see how our registration and master schedule shakes out.
And I want to throw something back on Pam, on your staff, not on Kim, but on your staff. If it looks like there's going to be a class that we're going to cut that's not going to be offered at all, what are the alternatives for that student to do that? Because then that can build off this policy here and we can try to tighten it down a little bit more.
Right, right.
Plus, the other key thing about it too is on this policy, and we'll ask about it, is what are other schools doing? How are we compared with other schools on this type of policy? All right, any other questions on policy?
Can you just talked about master schedule on staffing and class size. We have the 20 student, if a class is gonna run below 20 student, and some of them are gonna have to. But what if a class has the 30 requirement or something like that, and then after the schedule's in place, how is changes to the schedule and the class dropping below
Right.
this target number? How can you
So what we're going to try to do,
just address that quickly?
I mean, there's not a bulletproof system to this. So what we're going to try to do is have the staffing sheets completed at the building level by the first week of February, so that I'll have access to them, and that Pam and her staff can begin building the master schedule based off of my recommendations of what classes will run and not run, or what we'll bring to the board. Then what we want to be able to do is try to run for a week or two some scenarios of a master schedule to try to work out as many of those conflicts as possible, to see how that will impact staffing or classes running, so we don't get in the same situation of this year where we had 30 kids sign up, but by the time we ran the master schedule, only 13 could take it. We want to try to work those out in February so that by the committee of the whole, or shortly thereafter, I can at least get with the personnel committee, our council, and begin to talk with them on, here's what staffing looks like even after working conflicts out in the master schedule. So I've put some time in there to try to work out some of those conflicts, Mike, so that at the end of the day, when we come to March, we should hopefully be as close to staffing as possible. Now, you could, the key thing to remember with staffing is you want to try to get as close to the number as possible, but you can always recall some staff back. You don't know what's going to happen in regards to mobility over the summer or transfer in, or second semester failures due to the state requirements of having to notify teachers 60 days before. And a kid, we could have 50 kids fail second semester English and then have to retake it the next year, and we might need to add a section of English. But the key is to try to keep those additions to a minimal, so that when you're finalizing your budget, you're not adding on too many FTEs. So you want to try to work out as many kinks of those as possible.
So how does the policy work? The class is 30, and if it drops below 20, like last year you said you gave a 30, 13, are we approving, does the 13 get run?
I would try to bring the classes that are under 20 that the board would need to approve on the same day as we would do reduction in force. So we would try to work as many of that out.
And that's a point in
Right,
time.
because
where
after that March deadline, If I collapse that class, we already have to keep that teacher.
And that's a point in time where we're not adjusting the schedule, hopefully too
Right.
much anymore.
One thing we talked about too yesterday, which will be somewhat of a culture shift, we've talked about that word a lot, but even a culture shift to parents, is there's been the practice of changing your mind after you've gotten your course verification sheet. You can't be doing that anymore. You have to really take your time when you're doing the course selection process, because that's what's driving the staffing numbers and that's what's going to be driving the RIFs. And in the past, we have allowed people after that deadline to say, hey, I don't want to take Spanish now, I want to take this. And we've tried to keep those changes to a minimum, but it has occurred to a point to where it could impact staffing. And after March, you can't really fluctuate that number unless you got somebody that has a dual certification, which is a very unique situation where you're going to say, hey, we're going to fold your elective, but we're going to open another section of English. You know, you get lucky with that, but that,
So then are we gonna communicate down, are you gonna communicate to your staff to communicate to the parents that when they're choosing these classes in the next few weeks, that they really gotta think about that they're being locked down or?
They chose them all.
and they already chose, and some of that's occurred and some of that's not
Occurred
occurred.
last year as
Yeah.
well, that we didn't
We started
allow
to
the
tighten that last year.
changes.
I'd like it to see even more
Yeah.
going
Well,
forward.
are you gonna do it like in college, like you can
You-
switch if there's an opening?
Well, but remember, we had 120 some transfer students that
Yeah.
came in too, so there isn't a lot of room for
Okay.
switching. So you can drop things for a study hall, but you're probably not gonna get into another class. You know, we have to hold some of those openings for the transfer kids that are definitely coming. We usually get about 45 to 50 freshmen by September. So if you look at our historical patterns, we know that reality is we're not holding huge amounts open for them, but we know they're going to happen, so when we staff. But building the master schedule, I'm a little concerned, Dr. Skink, is just in that that's like a 2-week turnaround or 3-week turnaround to build a master schedule. And my experience is it takes months to build a master schedule in a school, to finalize it and run through it several times, at least a month and a half. So I don't know if you're going to get everything finalized as tight as you want in the turnaround we have. You know, what you're talking about, Mr. Welch, with the, you know, did they conflict out? Are there too many? But one advantage in building the schedule this year is it won't be as complicated if we are condensing some of those courses, and there aren't as many of those courses running anymore. There aren't going to be as many singletons kids are conflicting with. So I think it'll be a little easier to build, but
Plus, we
it's
got
still a
learnings.
big process.
Plus, we had learnings this year that we are using for our next year's.
Yeah, I don't wanna come back in 6 months from now and we had a bunch of classes that were 30 and now they're running at 15.
Well, remember what the policy says, we do it based on when people apply, if
Right.
it changes.
Yeah.
But the two things, piece of information that going to follow John's would be helpful just to know, not to question, is how many courses did we eliminate that kids signed up for because there weren't enough? So I think that's something. And the
Yeah.
second thing is, like you said, what's the process of, you know, I sign up for whatever, I want to take photography 3, and there's only 12 kids, and no, that's not available. They already have alternates in there, so.
They do select all
Okay.
alternative classes, but some of the department chairs are already doing that. I mean, Kevin encouraged some of the department chairs to maybe not offer everything because that spreads everybody out.
Right.
What they decided to do was to allow kids to kind of vote with their selections of what they valued, and then, but they're looking at it now, saying, that's not gonna run, and pulling kids in, the counselors and the department chairs, and talking to them about, you know, what your alternatives were. So even before we get to the sectioning, they're already
Okay.
collapsing what Dr. King was talking about. They're already doing some of that. They're already taking away some of the courses. They're saying, this will have to run every other year. It certainly doesn't have enough students to run this year.
That's a good idea.
But they're looking at how many seniors are in it and when they're making it. And so they're looking at the schedule in a practical way now that they didn't do before, because the budget didn't demand it of them. So those conversations are already taking place in
Great.
some of the departments.
Thank
Okay.
you.
All right, nothing else on policy advisory. Is there anybody out here that wants, we had a big crowd before. Anybody out here that wants to speak? Yes, ma'am. Please come up and state your name and where you're from.
Should I sit?
Sure, you sit. We don't bite, I swear.
I'm Katie Andros, and I'm a sophomore here at our NRB.
And earlier today, one of my friends told me that AP Music Theory will be cut next year. And this was really upsetting me because I was really excited to take the class. And I noticed on your timeline budget that you'll be talking about this in February. And I'm just hoping that when you do, you'll consider that AP Music Theory is the only AP Music class offered here at RB. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Very well said.
Anybody else want to speak? Seeing none, Kevin has one more for the TV cameras. We have one more feeder school presentation, and that is where and when?
February 6th, I'll be doing the PTO presentation to our Patrons Council at RB. I think it's 7 o'clock in the Alumni Lounge, Pam, or is it 7:30?
It's 7 o'clock to meet and greet, and then they start at.
So probably closer to 7:30. That's on February 6th, and then February 9th, in collaboration with Camaric's Parent University, we'll be speaking to their PTO or PTA in regards to our budget development process and the reduction process.
All right, I just want everybody to know that we titled this Committee of the Whole and Special Meeting of the Board of Education because we're going to go into closed session to discuss personnel. And one of those, on the personnel, there was going to be 3 people that we're going to discuss for hiring. When we come out of that closed session, because we are calling this a special meeting, we will then vote on hiring of these people. Additionally, in closed session, we'll be talking about the RBEA litigation and the superintendent's mid-year review. Given that, do I have a motion to go in closed session?
Filed with the Board of Education, Township High School District 208, Cook County, Illinois, enters closed session for the purpose of considering employment, or dismissal of employees, collective bargaining issues, and litigation. Second. Cover it?
And evaluate superintendent evaluation.
That's appointment,
Okay,
dismissal, employees.
all right.
Second.
I have a second made by Mike Welch, second by Dan Moon. Marianne, take the vote.
Mr. Goodson?
Yes.
Dr. King? Yes. Mr. Moon?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. Welch? Yes. Mr. Cindy?
Yes. We are now going to move downstairs to the district conference office, and we'll open up when we come out of closed session there. So I thank you all for attending tonight, and have a safe drive home.